Hi, welcome to the 9th edition of the Reaktor Blocks Exploration. This time, I'm not actually going to do anything really cool synthesizer-wise, but we want to look at some cool stuff about Reaktor itself. One of the things about Reaktor is if you look at the Monark oscillators, which are basically a Moog clone oscillator. I forget the actual thing. It's like a A10110, something like that. I don't remember. Anyway, you'll notice that they have oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and oscillator 3 settings, so you can actually rotate between them. And actually says, look, there are 3 different oscillator models available in the Monark Oscillator, each with its own unique character and behavior. So what I wanted to kind of look at this time was, what are the differences? First off, they're labeled differently. Woohoo, isn't that exciting? But they all look the same. There are some differences in the key tracking, but we're not going to mess with that because we don't really care. What I did, I guess not what we did, was I set up a basic 3 oscillator synthesizer. And then I hooked up an oscilloscope to every one of the oscillator outputs. So there's nothing really special about this sound. It's just there. The reason you get that kind of deep warble is because I actually have all 3 of them set to slightly different frequencies, which I'm going to change in just a minute. But I wanted the sound to be a little bit differentiated. But they're all going, just a basic Monark filter, the VCA, and then there's a mixer which has all 3 of them set to top, equal volumes. So really a very simple synthesizer, 3 oscillator synthesizer, subtractive, with the only real thing that we're trying to look at here is that we have each of the oscillators hooked up to its own oscilloscope. So I'm just going to remove all of that because we really don't need it. But you see here you have oscilloscope 1, 2, and 3, and then you have scope 1, 2, and 3, and they're connected. I also have the range set really low, so you can see that it's, basically a visible waveform is what we're looking for. I'm going to hit a really low note here. So now we have all 3 of the frequencies being really, pretty similar. I'm going to reset the frequencies here so that they're all identical. Now, you can't actually see a difference. So at first glance, this was not a successful test. However, we can do some neat things. I have it set to the sawtooth waveform right now, which is just again, looks like a sawtooth. Isn't that exciting? But we can actually change the oscillator setting right here. So let's look at scope 2 as I change oscillator 2 from oscillator 2 to 3 and then back to 1. So, okay, so if we're looking at these two, they look identical. Oscillator 3 and 2 look identical. There is a slight difference with oscillator 1, but let's switch to it and see what it looks like. Okay, here we have a change. What we have now is oscilloscope, or oscillator setting 1 is actually a little bit broader than oscilloscope frequency 2, and the period's a little bit different. So if we set them all to oscillator 1, we should see the same thing. Now we have a very slight difference, a little bit more hollow because it's actually mixing the 2 that have slightly different periods. Okay, so that's kind of neat. We actually do see a reason the amplitude of the sawtooth is slightly different for oscillator setting 2 and 3 than it is for 1. So that's kind of cool. Now let's see what we can do with the others. Now here is your basic triangle waveform. Let's see what happens with that. Let's go ahead and set all of them to the settings so we've got something looking similar. Now, when we go to oscillator setting 2, you see that there's a slight difference in the peak. So it has a slight sawtooth edge at the very tip. So we can't really hear it. Now you can see the different periods. Again, we've got slightly different periods. Let's change to one of the other waveforms here. Here you see a very different period. And you see, you know, how oscillator 1, again, has a very different period, a different amplitude to the actual waveform itself. Now, pulse, if that's very different, I'm going to be surprised. Okay, so pulse worked out. Let's try one of the thin pulses. Oh, and we've got another change. We've got changes in amplitude and depth again. And I'm going to bet that this one's going to be the exact same. Oh, it's not. How about that? Oh, it is, yeah. Okay, so what did we learn here? Not a whole lot. We mostly learned that the oscillators do actually have slightly different characteristics, which is really neat and very useful sonically, because you can introduce depth simply by changing the oscillator. But we also saw some handy tools for actually looking at the sound. Now, we're examining the oscillator output directly. In some of the other videos, we've actually connected it to the output of the VCA or, you know, other parts of the frequencies, so we can actually watch the sound at different stages. The scopes are not especially grand. If you're looking for live output, they're really slow. But that doesn't mean they're not useful. So what we've looked at today is, you know, a couple of things, I guess, really the differences between the oscillators, and we've also built a toolkit for examining the output of other oscillators too, because we can actually plug in the bento box oscillators, you know, user oscillators, or different things like that, so we can actually see what the oscillators are generating, just like real electronics, and that's the glory of modular, without having, you know, except in this case, we've got probably what would end up being, you know, $2,000 or $3,000 of hardware on the hoof, you know, hooking up 3 different oscillators and, you know, oscillator scopes and having the full VCA. The whole modular equivalent of this would be incredibly expensive, but we have it for the cost of Reaktor, so that's really kind of cool. All right, guys, thank you a lot.